I'm Devorah Wallen, and I'd like to share my tea for two, my Torah thought for 2 minutes, more or less. This week it's going to be a lot more, because we've got to include a brief thought about Passover, which begins after this Shabbos. This week's Torah portion is Tzav, meaning command, regarding the sacrifices on the altar in the tabernacle. You might be familiar with the light that is always found at the front of the sanctuary in pretty much every synagogue or temple. It's called the Ner Tamid, the eternal light. The origin of this custom is found in this week's portion, where the verse states, "A perpetual fire shall be kept burning on the altar, it shall not be extinguished. Eish tamid tukad al hamizbeach lo sichbeh." In the times of the tabernacle in the desert, there was an altar, and then again in the temple in Jerusalem. However, after the destruction of the temples, we no longer had an altar to maintain this eternal flame. Even though there is a daily hope for the Messianic era, Mashiach times, when the temple is rebuilt, meanwhile, the vestigial reminder of this eternal light is found around the globe in our shuls. The Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, said, "We must live with the times," meaning we should find relevant and inspiring lessons for our day-to-day lives. Most of us, especially during COVID times, are not entering the synagogue to be mindful of the continuous fire connecting our personal sacrifices to Hashem and His creations. What is the significance of the eternal flame for us today when we don't have the altar? King Solomon the Wise in Proverbs says, "Ki ner Hashem nishmas Adam." The soul of man is the candle of God. The neshama is part of God Himself, always reaching for and trying to gravitate to its source. Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg, a modern-day Kabbalist, describes this phenomenon like this: "The living soul of man, the candle of God, sways back and forth, always aspiring to return to its divine source, the infinite light of God." The soul's natural phenomenon of swaying, like a living candle, reaches its peak when we learn God's Torah and pray to Him from the depths of our hearts. Kabbalah explains that we each have a personal internal altar where we can offer our own unique gifts back to Hashem. As the Maggid of Mezrich, the main student of the Baal Shem Tov, taught, performing the right actions without energy and warmth, fire and intensity, our action is inert, uninspired, disconnected. Using our personalized gifts of energy and passion, making an initial effort from below, engenders a reciprocal awakening from above. Our fire arouses God's flame, creating a ping-ponging effect that continues and grows. Each ignition inspires the next. Remember the words in the verse, "It shall not be extinguished"? There's an interesting gematria on these words, lo sichbeh. Since the neshama always has a living connection with Hashem, it will never be put out, turned off. This is alluded to in the numerical equivalent of the initials of the words lo sichbeh, lamed saf. This equals 430, the gematria of the word nefesh, or soul. We are thus promised the soul is eternal, never to be snuffed out. The Maggid has another novel interpretation for the verse, "A constant fire shall not be extinguished." He plays with the words lo sichbeh, "it shall not be extinguished," saying that all of us have the lo, the negative, the no, the not good, that which is not helpful, healthful, growth-oriented, etc. The Maggid says the lo, the negative in us, must be extinguished, sichbeh. In other words, douse and smother the lo, the negativity. With the Maggid's reframe, we can read it this way: "The fire should stay ignited, and you shall extinguish the lo, the negative." The fire that fuels your altar is so potent, it can eliminate the negative elements that may stand in its way. Focused on strengthening ourselves, we won't even need to see the negative. Lo sichbeh, the negative itself diffuses and is gone. In the second verse of Parshas Tzav, it says, "The burnt offering should remain on the altar all night until the morning, while the flame, mokdah, on the altar is still going." Last week in Parshas Vayikra, we mentioned the interesting phenomenon of intermittent small and large letters found throughout the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. Again, in Parshas Tzav, we have a small letter mem in the word mokdah, which means flame. The letter mem, spelled out, is mayim, water. The Torah is considered like water that is refreshing, reviving, flowing downward from a high place. The Hasidic leader, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, says, "Even if an average person who is involved in worldly affairs with little time to devote to Torah study, his little mem, his little mayim, is nonetheless considered a flame that needs to be maintained on the altar all night until the morning." In other words, sacrificing even a small amount of time and energy to Torah study when one is engaged in mundane affairs is powerful. Even overnight, during the challenges and darkness of the world, we need to keep the flame alive. This parsha is read as we go into Pesach. We see the Mem is prominent in the recital of the Haggadah and the whole Passover Seder. Consider these important names and elements beginning with the Mem, the first letter of Mitzrayim, Egypt, and all of the constraints we left behind. The Mem of Manishtana, Moror, Matzah, Moshe, Miriam, the 10 Makos or plagues. With all the interesting occurrences in the world, you might think we're getting close to something literally earth-shattering, such as Mashiach. The Rambam's last words from his magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah, quotes a verse regarding Mashiach. This verse from Isaiah contains several mems and ends with the final mem that is equated with the final redemption. May we be worthy of Rambam's statement soon. And I quote, "At that time there will be no famines and no wars, no envy and no competition, for the good will be pervasive. All the delicacies will be as readily available as is dust. The world will only be engaged in knowing God. Then there will be very wise people who will understand the deep, sealed matters. They will then achieve knowledge of the Creator to as high a degree as humanly possible. As it says, Umala ha'aretz dea es Hashem, kamayim layam mechasim. For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the sea."